Hello, historians. Today we are going to begin Notes 2 for Unit 6 on the Cold War. We're actually going to do this we're going to break this set of notes up into 4 smaller lessons. So we're going to actually just focus on Part 1 today. Okay, Part 1 is going to be most of this page here. Okay, so you're going to need some color pencils out and be ready to hit the pause button so that you can color in what I tell you to color in and fill in what you need to know. All right, let's talk about the Cold War. Before World War II had even ended, the Allies had been meeting to prepare for peace. They did not want the same mistakes made from the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I, of course, because that led to World War II, and we did not want to see a World War III. As the war came to an end, the Allies had different views of what should happen to the countries in Europe as they were liberated from Nazi control. The United States and the Western European nations wanted to help those countries rebuild and let them elect their own democratic governments. Okay? However, so there's democracy, voting. Everyone who lives in that country would get to vote for representatives or people who would lead them. The Soviet Union had other plans. They, remember, had a communist revolution in 1917 during World War I, and they then had chosen Vladimir Lenin to lead them and to lead their nation in this communist ideology. We're going to talk about what that means in just a minute. And now they were under the control of the dictator that we talked about last unit, Joseph Stalin. And as Joseph Stalin was just as power hungry and land hungry as Adolf Hitler was. The only reason he fought on the same side as the Allies is because he wanted to make sure that Germany was defeated, and Germany was basically his greatest threat. So Soviet Union's got other plans after the war. They wanted to maintain control of all the nations that they helped liberate from Germany. Europe became divided between democratic and communist ideologies. Okay. So there's Stalin and Lenin. Okay. They did not want to allow people to vote. That's not something that is part of those communist ideologies. So let's talk about the difference between capitalism and communism. Under the ideals of capitalism, farms, businesses, and property are all privately owned. Individuals with money purchase property and start businesses and make decisions about how to use the land or the resources and how to run their business based on what they feel others will want and are willing to buy. People have more money than others. Some people have more money than others, which kind of can create an income gap, but there's always this push that if you work harder and you get a better training, that you can make more money in the future. Okay. Others can own more property and buy more goods, and the problem with that, I guess, for most people who are more of a communist ideology, is that they don't like the fact that some people have more money than others. They don't feel that that's fair enough. Okay, so on your notes, on the left-hand side, you're going to write capitalism. It's going to be economic system based on private ownership of land and businesses. On the other hand, we've got communism. Under communism, the central government oversees the property, the farms, the natural resources, the businesses, and then all the people work together. The goal is that the people work for the common interest and benefit of everybody, so that it's all fair and square. And then the government is just there to oversee and manage. Here's the resources, here's the workers. And they control the resources for the workers, and they determine what crops are going to be needed for the whole country. So who grows what and how much of it and how much it's going to cost for everybody. And this is how communism is supposed to work. The thing is, communism in all of these situations in the early part of the 20th century was that it was also paired with a dictatorship where you've got one person making all these choices, and there's no choice for the people. So communism, you're going to write down, it's an economic system where the government controls the land and the businesses. After World War I ended, the US chose not to join the League of Nations, but this time after World War II, America decided to work together with other nations to establish a lasting peace. The United Nations was formed in 1945 as an international organization to promote peace, security, and cooperation between world nations. The US not only joined, but they also based the UN headquarters building, which you see in the background, in New York City. So would you please write down United Nations, international organization to promote peace and cooperation between nations. As peacetime settled over war-torn Europe, the world observed as two nations rose above the rest, with power and influence. The United States and the Soviet Union became the world's superpowers. These countries had opposing ideologies. The US was based on democracy and capitalism. The Soviet Union was based on communism, led by a dictatorship. So instead of this cooperation, we've got these two superpowers kind of duking it out for the most control and influence. So you're going to write down countries competing for the most global power and influence. When Germany surrendered in 1945, it was divided into two. East Germany was occupied by the Soviet Union because Russian soldiers had come in and surrounded Hitler from the east. The United States and our other allied forces came in from the west, and that's how they surrounded Berlin and basically forced Germany to surrender. So now you've got two opposing sides that had taken, that had victories on both sides of this country. And they felt that they needed to control, the Soviet Union wanted to control all of Germany since Germany had invaded Russia twice. Stalin was very upset about that. The Western Germany was controlled by troops from the United States, France, and Britain. The capital city of Berlin was split in half. In April of 1949, 10 Western democratic nations of the United States and its allies formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to be a permanent alliance. The Soviet Union and its Eastern Communist allies formed their own permanent alliance, well, what they felt was going to be a permanent alliance. They called them the Warsaw Pact. These two alliances had opposing ideology. NATO supported democracy and capitalism. The Warsaw Pact supported the Soviet Union's communist economy under Joseph Stalin's dictatorship. So you're going to write down NATO is an alliance between the US, Canada, and 10 Western European countries. The Warsaw Pact, okay, is a military cooperation of Eastern European nations with the Soviet Union. So on this map, we're going to color in the two opposing sides of the Cold War. Okay? I chose light green. We have the nations of NATO who worked with the United States and Canada, who are not pictured on this portion of the world map, but you know that NATO also includes the US and Canada. In the pinkish red color, I chose to use that for the Warsaw Pact nations, and then I left white any of the countries who were members of neither side. Once again, Switzerland wants to remain neutral, Spain wants to remain neutral. These other nations, they didn't want to risk making any enemies either way. And then, of course, we've got this dotted line. That's going to be what the British Prime Minister at the time nicknames the Iron Curtain, and the name sticks. It's kind of this symbolic wall, or in many areas that are just fences, but it's all the dividing line between the Eastern communist ideologies and the Warsaw Pact, and then the Western democratic and capitalist ideologies supported by NATO and the US. So you're going to write in there, Iron Curtain is the division between communist East Europe and democratic West. There's a picture of it in I think that's part of Yugoslavia. Both sides, you can see, have somebody there to monitor. Okay, containment is something that NATO and especially the United States supported. This is the policy of fighting the spread of communism, and that's going to take a couple of different forms throughout the course of modern history here. So you'll see some different times where we use containment as our policy, our foreign policy. Okay, and also the Marshall Plan. This was a foreign policy that we established after World War II, and it's our plan to help Europe rebuild. and recover after World War II. Now, we can only do that for the nations that we and NATO have access to, and so we can't help the countries on the other side of this Iron Curtain to do that. So sadly, a lot of these countries are not going to get rebuilt very well until much later, until after the Cold War ends. Okay. As the US and NATO helped rebuild democratic, capitalist Western Europe, the Soviet Union controlled everything east of the Iron Curtain. In Germany's capital city, people had been trying to escape communist East Germany into democratic West Germany. So in 1961, the Soviet Union built a wall to try and keep people from escaping communist East Berlin into the freedom of West Berlin. The wall was 25 miles long and existed for 30 years, with the Soviet soldiers guarding the eastern side of the wall, ready to shoot anyone trying to escape. So here's some photographs. Okay, please write down for Berlin Wall. It's 25 miles of concrete wall dividing communist East Germany and democratic West Germany. In 1989, after other nations had removed those physical barriers and more Eastern Europeans were flooding into the freedom of the Western European countries, the Berlin Wall began to come down, and this came 2 years after President Ronald Reagan. There's the Berlin Wall coming down. Here's some more of the celebration in 1989. This is 2 years after President Ronald Reagan had traveled to Berlin and given a speech at Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Behind him, you can see that. He basically said, you need to tear down this wall. He said, Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. We'll see in just a second. Gorbachev was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time in the 1980s. The clash in ideologies between democratic, capitalist West and the communist East led to a rivalry between the world's two superpowers. The United States represented values of democracy, freedom, and capitalism. The Soviet Union represented communism with power belonging to the central government. Joseph Stalin turned the Soviet Union into a modern industrial giant. Propaganda was used on both sides to remind citizens of why their ideology was best for them. This division of ideologies led to the Cold War. Unlike traditional wars, the Cold War was not a literal war fought with soldiers and weapons. The Cold War was a global struggle for power between the democratic United States and the communist Soviet Union. At times, the Cold War turned into some physical wars, which we call proxy wars, with each side sending troops and supplies to opposing sides of an actual physical war. So please write down in your notes, the Cold War is 1949 to 1991. It's the global struggle for power and influence between the US and the USSR, which is an abbreviation for the United Soviet Socialist Republic or Soviet Union. And on your timeline, write down the Cold War began in 1949. Okay, there's Mr. Gorbachev. In 1985, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev hoped to make communism work better for people and began reforms that led to increases in freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion for his citizens, and he hoped to revise the structure of the economy also, hoping that this would help modernize the nation. There was, if you can do a YouTube search, you can find videos of what it was like to try and shop in the supermarket under communism in the Soviet Union. There's nothing in there. There's no choice. Gorbachev met with President Reagan and agreed to reduce the number of nuclear weapons as well, which we'll talk about the nuclear arms race here in upcoming section. In 1989, Soviet states in Eastern Europe began holding elections for their own leaders. The Berlin Wall was torn down. A new revolution was taking place to end communism in the Soviet Union. On Christmas Day, 1991, the Soviet flag flew over the Kremlin building in Moscow for the last time. The Soviet Union was dissolved and the Cold War was over after 40 years. There's the new Russian flag that was flying over the Kremlin after that point. And so then you can write down for 1991 that the Cold War ended. Now there's going to be stuff that we're going to talk about further in this unit that happens in between these two dates. So don't think that we're done talking about the Cold War. The next couple of days we're going to be talking about other things that were a part of the Cold War. Okay, so we'll look forward to that, and we'll keep heading that direction. Have a great day.